Hi, it's Kristen. I'm going to do another Feminist Friday. I thought this time I would do a non-fiction, but it is another reread. But I haven't read this in a couple of years, I think. And it is Women and Power by Mary Beard. I thought I'd do this one because it's really short. It's, let's see, actual page count, like just over 100 pages. This was one of my Instagram reading this recently and it made me want to pick it up again. So Mary Beard is a classicist, is that how you say it? She's a well-known British classicist, and this is like her going through points in history and looking at the way women were treated in terms of like power and position and that kind of thing. My mum got me this for Christmas a couple of years ago, which was nice because I always like to get a book for Christmas, or just any day, but it's nice to like read it around Christmas time, I think. And this was like my New Year's book. Went into the new year with a strong feminist theme that year, so I thought I would read it this January. Yeah, so excited to get back into this. So this little book is based on two lectures that Mary Beard has given. One that is about, remember, the public voice of women, and one about women in power, and they focus on Western culture and the history of how power structures have been patriarchal and stuff, based on like Greek and Roman history and how things were in place then and how that has affected how things are in place now, which is very interesting to me. And straight away she acknowledges that like she and her family are privileged in ways. She talks about the privileges that her mum had, but also the disadvantages her mum had. Her mum was born before she had the right to vote, but she was able to be a part of change, and how she saw, you know, women gain the right to vote, a female prime minister come into power, even though it was Margaret Thatcher, and how things have definitely changed, but that she also acknowledges that there is so much more change to come. It sort of reminds me of that argument when people say, oh, like, Western women don't need feminism because like things are fine, we can vote, we can do this, we can do that, but it's like, yeah, but there is so much more to do. So straight away I'm immediately relating to this. That I just read that was really interesting. She was talking about a speech that Queen Elizabeth I apparently gave, where she refers to herself as like a feeble woman, and that she truly has the heart of a king and she can be kingly, when she's talking to some, I believe it's troops, but that there is no like first hand account of that, and no writing from Elizabeth herself about that speech, and the only account we have of it is from a man years later. So how do we know that she said that? It's just interesting. It's to think about. Something else I found really interesting is that she's talking about like famous speeches that have ended up in like lists of famous speeches and books about famous speeches and stuff, and all the ones that, or most of the ones that by women that are hailed as these like impressive speeches are about women and women's issues, and the ones by men can be about anything, and the ones by women are to do with women specifically, which I think is interesting. And she says, like, yeah, someone's got to speak up for women, so that's good, but that men can talk about women and men and the environment and just the world and communities in general, whereas women talk about women. And I just think that's interesting. This is just going to be so many clips of me going, I think that's interesting. But I do think it's really interesting. I think the history of public speech is really interesting. More interesting things to think about. She talks about how women, the way that women speak is often criticised. There's like, she gives examples of like historic things when women have spoken publicly and people have said that they've whined and barked and gossiped and all just very either flippant ways to describe how one is speaking or very like rude and insulting ways to describe it, and how then like modern times she was sort of had a lot of people saying misogynistic things to her on Twitter, and when it was reported in like a news article, they described her as whining about the comments she was receiving, when all she said apparently was that she was gobsmacked by the misogyny, and they reported it as she said the misogyny was gobsmacking, she whined, which is ridiculous. But it reminded me that there's a podcast I listened to called You're Wrong About, which is brilliant. You should listen to it. They go through like historical, mostly, stuff that was always like perceived one way, but actually this is the real truth about it. It's very interesting. They cover all sorts of topics, but it's hosted by a woman and a man, and they occasionally, I follow them both on Twitter, they occasionally post like reviews that they get that either they find really kind or that they find really funny or ridiculous, and there are so many comments that complain or are just rude about the way that Sarah, the female host, talks. It's just reviews of, oh, I like this podcast, but the woman's voice is really irritating. She says the word like too much. She's got awful vocal fry. And they pretty much only say that kind of stuff about Sarah. So the essay about women and public speaking, I think it's so interesting, as I have said multiple times, that I kind of want to find something that goes into more detail about this sort of thing and read more about it. But I think this is like a really good start. It gives you, I think, enough history and enough comparisons to modern day to get across its point and its argument, and interest me further anyway. So at least for the first essay, I highly recommend this. Onto the women in power section now, and something she's talking about is how even though there are more women in power now than there were in the past, she uses the example of in the 1970s 4% of MPs were women and now 30% of MPs are women, so it is getting better. But when we think of like presidents and prime ministers and people in positions of power, we still tend to think male because mostly men have filled those positions, but subconsciously or consciously we think men in positions of power. And even, she says, like in terms of when we think professors, we tend to think men, even women will do it. Even she will do it, even though she is a professor. And I definitely think that's true. If I am reading a book and there's like a character that's not referred to in any descriptive way, it's just their name, and it's just like Dr. Smith, I tend to first imagine a man, unless it's like otherwise stated. I hate that. Like, I'm a feminist, and I will still, if you just say Dr. so-and-so or Professor so-and-so without like any extra descriptor of like their physical appearance or gender or like what they're a doctor in or anything, I tend to skew male when I think about it, and I hate that. I hate it, but it's true. Yeah. Like, is it a wonder that we don't initially think of things like that? Because she says she googled cartoon professor, and the first 100 pictures that came up, out of the first 100, one was a picture of a woman, and it was a picture of a character from Pokemon, but all the others were depictions of men. So if that is what we see on Google and in magazines and books and on TV and in movies and just like media in general, we can't be surprised when those are our first thoughts of what constitutes a type of person. And it's infuriating. So I'm on a section where she's drawing a lot of comparisons between Greek myth and the way that women are shown to be in power or not in power nowadays, and is talking a lot about how people really took the Perseus Medusa myth and like artwork around that and made Medusa into like Angela Merkel and Hillary Clinton, and especially Hillary Clinton, and made Perseus into Donald Trump, and it was all about him defeating her and stuff, and it's just, I'd forgotten about all of that. It's just gross. It's just horrible. But in a weird side note, it's making me want to read more about Greek myth again, because I loved like Greek and Egyptian like mythology and stuff when I was younger, and it's making me want to get back into reading about Greek myth, but perhaps find some more modern retellings that are, you know, changing up the original myths and making them more feminist or whatever, because the original myths are just awful to women. Yeah. If you have any recommendations for Greek myth, or just like myth retellings with women at the centre or feminist twists or anything, leave me a comment down below. I would be very interested in hearing your recommendations. I just wanted to share a quote that I quite liked, that says, "We have to be more reflective about what power is, what it is for, and how it is measured. To put it another way, if women are not perceived to be fully within the structures of power, surely it is power that we need to redefine rather than women." It's really weird reading non-fiction that talks about like current events years after the time. This wasn't published like that long ago, and she talks about how these were speeches made in 2014 and 2017, and so she did tweak some things to make them less set in that time or more like general. but that she didn't want to change things too much because it is important to remember the time in which things were said, to give context. But to read about things that happened years ago with like knowledge that I have now, or that like just generally we have now, is a bit ugh. She's talking about how during the 2017 UK election, Diane Abbott and Boris Johnson, who were both MPs, were doing like radio talks talking about their party policies and how they both like messed up on like the facts and figures that they were giving, and that Diane Abbott came under so much flack for what she said, and not just in a you should probably like know the statistics you're talking about kind of way, but like just really rude, sexist, racist stuff, because Diane Abbott is a black woman. And Boris Johnson also got called out for the mistakes that he made, but not in the same way. And now Boris Johnson's the Prime Minister. So overall, I think both essays are great. I think they're really interesting. They cover basics, but also I think, for me at least, interest me to read more about these topics in like further reading. She does have like a little section at the end that says further reading, and there's pages of references that she has made throughout this. I think also great in that she includes pictures and stuff of the things that she's talking about, so you have like visual context as well, which is really fun. Not fun, but adds a bit of like multimedia, which I enjoy in books. I think this is a really great one if you're scared to pick up like a big non-fiction book. This one is short, it's like 100 pages, and it's like a starting point. I think if you enjoy this, you would maybe be inspired to go on to read other things. I just remembered I do want to give a trigger warning. There are mentions of obviously threats to women, sexist language, and mentions of rape, and a couple of pictures of like ancient artwork that display the murder and sexual assault of the women that she is talking about, so a heads up on that. And just to finish off this video, I wanted to read the quote that's actually on the back of the book. So Mary Beard obviously thought sums up the like the bare bones of everything she's talking about, which I agree with. It says, "You cannot easily fit women into a structure that is already coded as male. You have to change the structure." So yeah, highly recommend. It's also just like a lovely looking book, so it's just nice to own. So if you have someone who's getting into feminism, I would recommend this as perhaps a gift, or if you yourself are getting into feminism and you want something simple but that does delve into topics and includes contemporary examples and historical examples, then I would recommend this. Obviously it's just about like the Western culture, so it's definitely not going to cover everything, but it doesn't attempt to. She does make that clear at the beginning that it is about like Western culture, and she doesn't say like this is about women and feminism in general, and then doesn't mention different countries and continents. So if you're looking for a book about Western feminism, then I think this is a good short introduction to lighter stuff, but I am definitely interested in reading maybe something similar that has to do with other cultures like Asia, Africa, and to learn more about places that aren't in the West. So if any of you have recommendations for that, they would be very welcome as well. So that is all for this Feminist Friday, and I will see you with another one soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.